We are back. This is your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, the Money Stop, presented by Kicking the Tires. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. We are the Cusumano brothers, and this is your most important betting stop of the day when it pertains to NASCAR. Cole, splash and go like any good pit stop. Let's get right into this thing. Ryan Blaney, back at the site of his first career Cup Series win at Pocono, wins once again. And, again, he was a guy that we pinpointed. We had a very successful week in terms of our analysis a week ago, and Ryan Blaney was a big reason for that.
Right on. Ryan Blaney back in victory lane once again for the second time this season, for the first time at Pocono in 7 years, back to his first win in the Cup Series, and Team Penske's first win at Pocono since 2011. So this was a big victory for that organization, that manufacturer, and I think what we've seen from Ryan Blaney over these last, month plus now has been really impressive. That whole stable as a whole has been turning it on, and I think from an analytical sense, we did a really good job with Pocono, and that was kind of expected. I feel like over the years, you have these races at Pocono, and they're pretty standardized, whether it be a different car, a different system, whatever it might be, like different package, different tires. Pocono's Pocono, and I think we have a pretty good grasp on that, and that's made evident by the results that we have here. You mentioned us, the very successful forecasting by us. 7 of the top 10 drivers were highlighted in our episode of the 12 mentioned. The other drivers who did not make up the top 10, we had 2 in the top 15, one of those being a favorite in Kyle Larson in 13th. Eric Jones in 14th finished top 10 in both stages as one of our favorite value picks, had an excellent day. And then we had Ty Gibbs, who I was very high on. He had the pole in this race, led 21 laps, and then his engine expired late in the running. And then he also had 2 other value picks in Stenhouse and Gilliland, who wound up crashing and kind of tanking those their respective days. But overall, I think we did a pretty good job. Like you said, 7 of the top 10 drivers is no easy feat for anybody in the betting realm. And I think honestly, we're going to Indianapolis this weekend, which is kind of an unknown in a sense because we have not been on the oval in 4 years, which, by the way, I'm very pumped for this tradition to be realized once again. But I think that Pocono was a good primer for Indy because, as we know, there are 3 very different corners at Pocono, but one of the turns is modeled after Indianapolis. And no, you got to get all 4 corners right at a very tough track like Indy, but I think having a similar tire compound to Pocono and having the what we know from this race last week and what we've seen from history, we should have a pretty good grasp on what we are previewing this weekend at Indianapolis.
You're right. There's a lot we can go off of based on last week and prior weeks as well. So I think you're going to hear a lot of the same names that we talked about that made us successful last week, like Ryan Blaney and company. So, Cole, as we kick it into high gear here, get into our starting lineup, the fact that we won't know that until Saturday at 1:05 Eastern time. So, weekly disclaimer, obviously you don't want to lock in many DFS lineups until you know where the drivers are starting, but there's definitely some value to be had. A good example last week, if you looked at a guy like Ryan Blaney before the cars hit the track and you bet on him to win, you would have made more money because his odds moved in the opposite direction once he unloaded pretty solidly. So I think that there's a reason we do these before qualifying, and you want to take advantage of value where it is to be had entering the weekend. So looking at the DraftKings odds, pre-qualifying, Cole, we've got a favorite for the win. His name is Denny Hamlin at plus 375. Kyle Larson is plus 575. You got Ryan Blaney at plus 800, Brad Keselowski plus 850, and Chase Elliott rounds out the top 5 at plus 1,000. So let's talk about some favorites for this race here, Cole, and why not start with last week's winner?
We got to talk about Ryan Blaney, a guy who is getting too good to ignore at this point in the season with 5 races in the regular season left. We mentioned it numerous times. It's been well documented. The Ford stable as a whole and Team Penske and Ryan Blaney did not get off to a hot start at all in 2024, but now they have effectively rounded into form. Ryan Blaney is now red hot, riding a 3-race top 10 streak, most recently obviously coming off his second win of the season at Pocono. And this now ties his longest stretch of top 10s this season, going back to weeks 2 through 4. So you want to see your teams round into form at this point in the season, at the midway point, going into the playoffs. And it's clear as day to say that Ryan Blaney and that 12 team have definitely got it hooked up at this point in the season. And I think the big thing that we need to note going into Indy is that this is a home race for Team Penske as a whole. Roger Penske owns this track. I think obviously having his whole stable turn it on as of late is a huge deal, and I think that it's going to turn up the heat a little bit more for guys like Austin Cindric and Joey Logano to get those additional wins as well, going into a home race for that organization. And I think this is a great spot for them to keep that momentum rolling, especially in the case of the 12 team. I mean, we're speaking on him obviously as a favorite. He is plus 800 once again for the race win. That is the third shortest odds for the race winner. He also is the third most expensive in DFS at $10,000. And for, I would say, pretty good reason. It's hard to kind of go based off stats alone for this race. First off, seeing as we haven't been there in 4 years on the oval, but also in a sense that, like, unless you're looking at veterans like a Brad Keselowski, Kyle Busch, guys like that, you're not going to have a whole lot of starts under your belt if you're younger guys like Ryan Blaney, Chase Elliott, etc. So what we have to go based off of, I think Ryan Blaney is a solid pick, factoring in his consistency as a whole the last month plus in the Cup Series. But you look at his 6 starts in the Cup Series at the Indy Oval, he led laps in half of those starts, and he has a best finish of 7th in that 6-race span. So pretty solid numbers to go based off of there, I would say. And again, just factoring in his current stretch, I think Ryan Blaney should be a great pick and one that should not be ignored at this point in the season to kiss the bricks at Indy. But someone who I have my eye on is someone who's already raced at Indianapolis this year once before in the Indy 500, and that's going to be Kyle Larson. That's right, he is returning to the site of the infamous double that was foiled back in May. Kyle Larson is the second shortest odds to win at plus 575, as well as the second most expensive in DFS at $10,300. And I'll be honest, Kyle Larson's had a little bit of a snag here in the regular season. His 13th place finish at Pocono marked back-to-back finishes outside the top 10. And for me, that gives me a little bit more ammunition to use him this week as a legitimate contender for this win. And, I mean, this is the bottom line. I feel like every single week going forward, you're not going to see a favorites category that doesn't have Denny Hamlin or Kyle Larson, and that's for obvious reason. They've been the 2 best drivers the entire season. We know that by their stats, their wins, their laps led, but I think there's something to be said about Kyle Larson and returning to the side of this double that he, was really disappointed in. So I think returning here to the side of that double, getting that shot at redemption for both, what was a foiled attempt and for what's back-to-back pretty off weeks for him in the Cup Series, it's going to bode well for him. And I also think that any track time isn't valuable. It might have been in a different car, different series for that matter, but I think that's going to play a big factor into how he runs this weekend. He also, like Ryan Blaney, has 6 starts in the Cup Series at Indianapolis with a 50% top 10 rate, so 3 top 10s in those 6 starts, and a best finish of 5th in those 6 races. Also want to note he's 3 points behind Chase Elliott now in the standings. So, again, 5 races until the playoff starts. They want to get back into that, win column once again, back in the top 10 column, and they want to get back in first place and snag that regular season championship because, as we've seen with this new point system and this new car, that is a very, very huge advantage when you look at the complexion of the 2024 playoffs.
And like you said, you cannot leave the favorites category without talking about Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin, who is the odds-on favorite this week, plus 375. He is also, with very good reason, the most expensive daily fantasy driver at $10,500. And he's coming into this race hot. He was my race pick to win a week ago at Pocono, finished 2nd there, tied for the most top 5s in the series entering this week with his 8th. 31 laps led last week. He now needs 5 more laps led to pass Kyle Larson for the most this year. And why not this week? One thing with Denny Hamlin, too, you talked about the fact that Kyle Larson was here earlier in the season in an Indy car. Well, Denny Hamlin was there at Indy last month as part of the tire test. He's got 15 starts at this track overall with a 50% top 10 rate and a best finish of 3rd, which has happened 3 times. So for Denny, a lot of people like to say he's got all the boxes checked in his Cup career except for a championship. Well, he doesn't have Indy checked off either. I think he knows that very well, and he wants to kiss the bricks, and he's got just as good a chance as anybody, and that's why he's the favorite to win this week and largely every week in the Cup Series along with Kyle Larson. But as we went with the top 3 drivers and odds for our favorites here, Cole, let's round this out with a guy that has an extremely good value, and it actually is longer odds than a few of our sleepers this week, but we feel so good about Tyler Reddick to call him a favorite this week. He is plus 1,200 for the race win, 8,800 in daily fantasy, which is just inside the top 10 in odds. And he finished 6th at Pocono last week, which gives Tyler Reddick a 4-race stretch of top 6 finishes, which includes a runner-up. So he's been one of the most consistent drivers during the summer. And you talked about Kyle Larson contending for the points championship in the regular season. Well, Tyler Reddick is only 15 points back of first, so that team has a lot to race for. And in his only other start on the Indy Oval, it was an 8th place finish for Tyler Reddick. So you're talking about a driver that's hot, that has a lot to race for. There might be a risk factor involved because of that. I think he can definitely go out on more of a risk than certain other drivers that can't afford to lose points. But just looking at what Tyler Reddick's done recently with 4 straight, essentially top 5s, and a really strong summer, and just a team that seems to be peaking at the perfect time. We've seen the speed from the Toyotas really uptick the last few weeks. I think that, you can make the case that Reddick is a sleeper based on that value, but we feel so good that we're going to call him a favorite this week.
Yeah, and making this outline, I just found it really, really difficult to put him in that sleeper category. I know he only has the 1 win this year, but he should have multiple at this point. He's got that 4-race top 10 stretch. And if you ask me, we mentioned obviously Hamlin and Larson being the class of the field the entire season, but I think at this point in time, sitting halfway through the 2024 season, I think Reddick and Blaney are the 2 hottest drivers in the sport right now. So for that reason, I like this favorites category a lot, and I think there's a lot of value to be had in the race winner realm. As we get into the sleeper section here, I think you're going to see that as well. I think there's a very slim margin for drivers who are going to contend for this win, but obviously, like any weekend, especially where you have a full practice session, practice and qualifying are going to be so crucial to keep an eye on. But for all intents and purposes, what this show is for, and that is giving you the best odds before the on-track action to optimize those values, I think that there's a very slim, range of drivers who I think are going to have the most profitable value, whether it be from a prop sense in a top 5, top 10 value, or from a race-winning sense. So with that in mind, why don't you kick off our sleepers section here, Steven?
Well, I love talking about some more of the Hendrick Chevys, and that includes William Byron, plus 1,100 for the race win. He's coming off the top 5, 4th place at Pocono last week. He is also just above Tyler Reddick in terms of 9,000 in the daily fantasy budget. So he's 8th out of the most expensive drivers, coming off back-to-back top 10s for the first time since the end of May. So we were talking last week about the fact that he's definitely run into a little bit of a summer lull. It's kind of been more of the summer of Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, and even Alex Bowman. But I think you're starting to see the signs that William Byron is coming out of what you could look at as a summer slump with the back-to-back top 10s and a 4th place at Pocono last week. And he was a winner at the Xfinity Series on the Oval at Indy. Best Cup finish at this track of 4th, and he's led laps in all 3 of his starts at Indy under the Oval configuration. So I think that William Byron has, like you mentioned, we love to highlight the hot drivers, the Ryan Blaney's, the Tyler Reddicks. I think that William Byron is establishing a stretch the likes of which they are on right now. And we've seen when he's hot, there aren't many better drivers in the garage. And I would rather be wrong about William Byron and his inconsistencies than not correctly predict the fact that we could see the signs of it formulating entering this week. So I think it's going to be a strong week at Indy for William Byron. And he's another guy. He's just got a knack for these crown jewel type of races. I mean, he won the 500 this year, and he wants to kiss the bricks just as much as anyone as well. Like a former champion of the sport, Brad Keselowski, plus 850 for the race win, 9,300 in daily fantasy, which is the 6th highest odds, or at least the 6th most expensive driver. So Vegas likes Brad K a lot, and here's probably why. He finished 7th at Pocono, first top 10 in about a month for Brad K last week. So we were talking about the fact that he's run into a little bit of a slump last week as well, but you could see the signs of him coming out of that. But talking about his success on the Indy Oval, he is one of only 2 active drivers to have a win at the Brickyard. He's also won here in the Xfinity Series, and under the Oval configuration, he's got 6 top 10s out of 11 starts. So for a guy that I think you're going to start to see the fact that, like you said at the beginning of this episode, it's the first time visiting the Indy Oval since basically 2020, and we've seen a lot of drivers come on very strong in the sport over these last 4 years. Guys like Tyler Reddick, Ty Gibbs, we've talked about William Byron, but there's something to be said for the experience of the older Cup drivers like Brad K, like a Chase Elliott, or even like a Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, that have expanded reps on the Oval at Indy. And not only does Brad K have that, he has success on the Indy Oval. So I think that I love the veterans of the sport this week that have logged a ton of laps on this oval, and Brad Kay is near the very top of that list. And he's, you could very easily call him a favorite, but we're going to go with the sleeper this week because there's just such great value to be had.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of both those drivers, especially William Byron. I think you could definitely see that team trending in the right direction, building that consistency. And we've seen that 24 car be so dominant in the past on the Indy Oval. And I think you're right. Like, he won the 500 earlier this year. Rick Hendricks dive in the pace car this weekend. So I think that the pressure is going to be on. I think that they know this is a massive, massive deal returning to the Oval in a crown jewel event. And I have a great feeling about William Byron this weekend as a sleeper. And just on the sleeper aspect of things, we've had a sleeper win the race the last 3 weeks. So, I mean, you look at that value, plus $1,100, $9,000 for DFS, 2 outstanding values. Someone who's actually in that same air, and you mentioned the experience aspect, which I really was high on as well when making this outline. Someone who I liken to him quite a bit is Joey Logano, who's plus $1,500 for the race win and $8,600 for DFS, which is right inside that top 10 of the values. And why I like Joey Logano is because you mentioned it, like just speaking on that big energy aspect of things, the crown jewel events. Joey Logano is one of those guys that rises to the occasion time and time again. It doesn't matter where he is at a certain point in the season, what stretch he's been on, he will always rise to the forefront as a contender. And I think that's going to show its head once again this week in Indianapolis, because you look at, first of all, what he's done over the last 5 races. He silently has 3 top 10s over that 5-race stretch, coming off a top 5 at Pocono at laps led as well. So he has momentum on his side, which I think that's the first time the entire season we can say that about Joey Logano. And it could not come at a better time, because we mentioned it with Brian Blaney. This is a home race once again for Team Penske. Do not think for one second that organization is going to lay down and accept anything less than a win this weekend at a home track. And you look at Logano's stats from his Cup career, he actually has one of the most starts in the Cup Series among these active drivers with 12. He also has the best average finish of all those drivers at 10.8, with 8 top 10s in those 12 starts and a best finish of runner-up twice. So while he has not come home a winner at the Indianapolis Oval, he's come very close on multiple occasions. He's proven that his worth time and time again as a top 10 driver. And I think when you talk about sleepers, obviously it's a sleeper for the win, which I do fully believe that Joey Logano is capable of going out there and kissing the bricks. But it's also, in my opinion, you're looking for somebody who's more of a sure thing for a top 10 finish, challenging for a top 5. And Joey's definitely somebody who I can see going out there and getting back-to-back top 5 finishes this season. And now, for my final sleeper, I think I would be ignorant to not mention this driver, because he spent years just tormenting the competition on the Indianapolis Oval, whether it be in the Nationwide Series or the Cup Series. But he has had an abysmal season, and that's going to be, obviously, Kyle Busch, who is plus $4,000 for the race win and only $8,000 for DFS. And the thing is, like, he's on an awful stretch. He's coming off his 4th DNF over his last 5 starts. So my question is, can it possibly get any worse for Kyle Busch? And in my opinion, I don't think so, but I think there is reason to believe this is a place that he can get the ship righted, or at least have one good start in that regard and maybe get things righted. I also want to mention during that 5 race stretch of those 4 DNFs, in between that, he was also one of those drivers that did the tire test at Indianapolis, where, oh, by the way, he did crash. So I don't know how you want to look at that crash in the tire test, but in my opinion, that's not like the end of the world. I think that just shows to you that that's a guy pushing it to the absolute limit, and someone who's going to have a better grasp of like what these cars are capable of and what he's capable of going into this race. So it doesn't really scare me. I think, if anything, it makes me intrigued to see how he handles that, knowing what he knows, and just coming off that abysmal stretch. Like, I just really don't think it can get any worse. And we mentioned, obviously, William Byron is a winner in the Xfinity Series at this track on the Oval. Brad Kay is a winner in the Cup Series on this Oval. Kyle Busch is the only other active driver that is a winner on the Indianapolis Oval in the Cup Series. However, he is the only driver that's a multi-race winner in Cup and the Nationwide or Xfinity Series. So he has 3 Xfinity or Nationwide wins. He has 2 Cup wins, which came in back-to-back fashion. And in his 16 Cup starts, which is the most in the series, he has 12 top 10, so a 75% top 10 rate in those 16 Cup starts, with 3 straight poles as well in that time and the back-to-back wins. So you know this is a track that he knows how to get around. And I will go as far as saying, if Kyle Busch does not perform and get a minimum of a top 10 finish in this race, we will not be mentioning him at all going forward on this show. There's no point in doing that. I think if there's going to be any race where he gets back on track or at least has a quality day, this is going to be it. And there's a reason why that his values are what they are, plus 4,000 for the race win and 8,000 for DFS. Again, those are great values if you're trying to optimize potential, but he's proven that he hasn't been a reliable driver in any aspects, whether you're betting on him as a race winner for prop bets or putting him in your DFS lineup. So there's definitely a lot of caution to be thrown in there with Kyle Busch, but you look at his history at this track and the fact that he did the tire test here a month ago, it makes me cautiously optimistic for his chances to get a quality finish this weekend.
And listen, we've talked about the fact we love a hot driver. We loved seeing Tyler Reddick, Joey Logano, William Byron, Ryan Blaney on this outline, but you're going to have to reach a little bit deeper if you want to make some money. And like you said, there's a reason Kyle Busch is plus 4,000 for the race win and 8,000 in daily fantasy. It's just such a good value for a guy that's literally held a checkered flag at this track 5 different times. And like you said, if there's ever a track where it's going to happen for him, where he's got a leg up on the competition, not only has he had proven success at the Indy Oval, but there's so many inexperienced drivers at this track. It's like the same how we've talked about what SVG last year at the Chicago street course. Like, he was one of the only drivers that had been on a street course around the rest of the field. It was such a big leg up for him. And we've seen it time and time again with different configurations with tracks coming up from the Xfinity Series. You see the guys that logged laps there in the Xfinity Series at places like Gateway perform well there in the Cup Series. So it's a similar sense because the guys that have been in the sport as long as Kyle Busch, as long as Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, they dominate our sleepers category because very rightfully so, especially in the case of Kyle Busch, they're being overlooked, but I don't think you should overlook them. And on that note, Cole, it's a good mix of mostly guys that have that experience and some that are just hot entering this week. But as we look at value picks this week, really, you could argue Kyle Busch is a great value pick at 8,000 in daily fantasy. But I'm going to make this pretty short and sweet. As far as the daily fantasy values go, there's 2 drivers I definitely have my eye on. One of them, I think he's a value every week, and you're probably tired of hearing us talk about him, but he's been our darling every single week. It's Todd Gilliland at 6,500 in daily fantasy. He performed on the tire test here last month. That was his only experience at the Indy Oval, but this is the site of his career best finish of 4th. So you're looking at a guy that has logged laps here this year, has been running well, has been very consistent, and has had good success at this track one way or another. And also, another name we haven't mentioned that's had some really good showings on occasion this year, Chase Briscoe, 6,900 in daily fantasy, coming off a top 15 at Pocono. And what I think of is the fact that this is a home race for Chase Briscoe. You mentioned that there's going to be some pressure on for Hendrick Motorsports with Rick Hendrick's birthday this week and him driving the pace car. There's going to be some pressure on the field for Team Penske with it being a home race. Well, for Chase Briscoe, you always want to perform at your home track. And he's had top 10s at both of his Xfinity starts at the Indy Oval, and he's coming off some pretty consistent results. So 6,900 for Chase Briscoe, 6,500 for Todd Gilliland. Sign me up for 2 great values in our daily fantasy lineup.
Yeah, I love both those picks a lot. And you know what? We're going to make this a complete Ford sweep in the value picks category. I'm going to go with another one of Briscoe's teammates, Noah Gragson, at $7,000 for DFS, simply for the fact that he's been one of the most reliable DFS options this year with top 10 upside, 6 specifically in that regard. He also has 10 top 15s in this 2024 season. And also want to keep in mind he finished 3rd in his lone Xfinity start on the Indianapolis Oval. So I know it's a very, very small sample size, not even really a sample at all. It's a one-off, but it's still a podium finish. And I think when you think of the unknowns going into this race, which there are a lot, especially in the value picks realm of things, given the inexperience, I think given the equipment and what we've seen this season from Noah Gragson, at least without seeing practice and qualifying, He is someone who I am very high on as a value pick for this weekend at that price, at $7,000, as well as somebody who is only $100 more expensive than him in the Todd Father's teammate, Michael McDowell. And we've been preaching it the entire show, but I think experience is going to be a pivotal thing when in factoring in the winner of this race. And again, I know we're getting that long extended practice session on Friday, but you look at guys who have experience at this track and experience in the Cup Series. Michael McDowell is one of those guys. 11 starts at Indianapolis, a best finish of 7th, which came in his most recent start there in 2020. But you look at what he did at Indianapolis prior to that, he finished 18th, 17th, and 17th in the 3 starts prior, and that was with 1 start with Levine Family Racing and 3 with his first attempts with Front Row. That's when they were not at their best. You're talking about a team in Levine who was, essentially a backmarker team. So for him to get those top 20 finishes and build towards a top 10 in that final race on the Indianapolis Oval, that I think speaks volumes to me. I know he's also technically the last winner at Indianapolis. He won the Indianapolis Road Course last year, so I think that should definitely instill some good vibes for that 34 camp going into this race. My only cause for concern is that hunt for the postseason in back-to-back years and the volatility that might instill, because you look at his position in the standings, he is over 150 points out of the cutoff, so he's in a must-win scenario, and I think that this team has proven time and time again that, over the last, 3 or 4 weeks, that they're going to do whatever it takes to win. They're not really points racing at this stage in the season, so there is definitely some volatility associated with that 34 bunch and Michael McDowell in a sense that they're only going for the win, so that might burn you in the end. But I do think there is something to say about the experience, like I've been saying with Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski and all those guys that have raced here before. So I do think that Michael McDowell has a lot of upside as a value pick this weekend at $7,100.
I think this is one of the best value weeks we've had this season in terms of daily fantasy, and we'll get to that in a second. I think it's a week where it's really easy to make a lineup to a point where it's almost difficult because of how many options there are. But before we get into that, let's get this field of 12 drivers down to 6 that we really keenly have a strong eye on, Cole. What do you got from each category?
For my favorite, I'm going to go with Kyle Larson. My sleepers for sure are going to be Joey Logano, and then we'll keep it in the Ford camp and go with Michael McDowell for my value pick.
I'll go with Denny Hamlin from the favorites. You just can't go wrong there. I will take William Byron from the sleepers. When he's hot, he's hot. And then for the values, I will take Todd Gilliland until he proves us otherwise. Let's talk some big money bets, though, here, Cole. These are prop bets that you can feel more comfortable putting a larger sum of money on. We actually got burned on one of these last week. We had a great week in terms of the forecasting of the race at Pocono, but Tyler Reddick finishing just outside the top 5 and 6th really hurt us. It sucked to see that, just seeing how well he ran in the race, just didn't get the top 5 result. But that's going to happen from time to time, and it's a reminder that sometimes it's not the worst thing to have an insurance bet of top 5 and a top 10. But as I mentioned, there's such great value this week. I think that there's definitely some that capture my immediate attention for maybe not a big money bet, but Chase Briscoe at plus 425 to be in the top 10 is one I've got my eye on for sure. We talked about him as a value. I think that's one that I might sprinkle on, but wouldn't put a huge amount of money on. But you could feel pretty comfortable with a couple of top 5 bets in several units on William Byron or Tyler Reddick to be in the top 5. They're at plus 140 and plus 150 respectively. So those were my 2 favorite big money bets, were Byron and Reddick to be in the top 5. But I think that there's a lot of food at the table here this week for the big money bets.
We're actually in the exact same boat, same as last week, honestly. So those are the same 2 that I had circled. Tyler Reddick, top 5, plus 150 was my lock for sure. But I was also eyeing down that William Byron, top 5, plus 110. I just have a good hunch about him this weekend. And again, we said it last week with the Gibbs top 5 prop and the Reddick top 5 prop. If we are agreeing on a certain prop or a certain driver or whatever, you're going to need to be perked up, and you should definitely be heavily considering this for a bet this weekend. And dug deep for that Chase Briscoe prop, plus 425 for a top 10. That's an excellent value. Usually you see drivers, even like of that caliber and that equipment, it's more like in the plus, like right around even, like plus 100, plus 120 range. But to see it plus 425 for a driver where it's his home track, He's run well here in the oval. He's run well here on the road course. That's almost like a no-brainer to me. So even if it's like $5, you're still getting a lot of profit out of plus 425 odds. I'm a big fan of that one. So I echo all of what you just said. Tyler Reddick, top 5. William Byron, top 5. And Chase Briscoe, top 10. But one thing I do want to say, I think there is more value to be had in the race winner props this weekend. Because, I mean, we mentioned it. Obviously, last weekend, Ryan Blaney was a winner as a sleeper. I think his value was plus 1,200 for the race win. The week before that, Alex Bowman won. Then you had Joey Logano winning the race. So, like, I think you're seeing the most value the past month or so being in that sleeper category. And I think if we're only seeing, like, 2 of those top 5 props that we're really high on, like, you should be focusing more of your assets in that race winner bracket, I would say, going into the race weekend. Obviously, once you have practice and qualifying, you have a better idea for who's going to run where and all that fun stuff. But I like the race winner values a lot for this episode.
I'll tell you what, too. We haven't mentioned it yet, but I do like the top 3 odds this week. I mean, everybody's in plus money, including Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney. I mean, like, take your pick of your race winner, and I think it can be a really strong bet for you to sprinkle on a top 3 bet for them as well. And even for a guy like Tyler Reddick that's got, 4 straight top 5s, or top 6s technically. He's plus 325 to be in the podium, plus 325 to be in the top 3. You got William Byron up there, similar odds. I think that there's some really good value to be made there as well for if you're picking a driver to win. There's definitely great values for top 3s. So this is a week where there's just such good value. And I think that even this week extends to some of the head-to-head match bets where you look at the head-to-head matchups, Cole, and per usual, I'll let you take this away after I rattle these off, but you've got a lot of drivers we have spoken about against a lot of drivers we have not spoken about. So I'll start with Ryan Blaney versus Truex. You got Keselowski versus Bowman, Elliott versus Reddick, Logano versus Gibbs, and Ross Chastain versus Chris Buescher. So there's definitely a week here at Indy where you could feel decently comfortable about parlaying these.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Ryan Blaney over Martin Truex Jr. Blaney is minus 155, so favored to finish ahead of Truex. I'm also a fan of the Reddick over Elliott at plus 100, so even money. I also wanted to mention something on Chase Elliott. I was kind of surprised to see him top 5 in the race winner odds because, like, going through his stats, first of all, over the last 3 or 4 races this season, but also seeing his history at Indianapolis, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm a really, really big fan of that even money for Reddick over Elliott. I would even call it a big money bet at this point in time. I know Elliott's been the most consistent driver the entire season, but consistency doesn't always, instill like the best results. And I think what we've seen over the last almost 2 months now is Reddick getting those top 6 finishes, podium finishes, and challenging for wins, whereas Elliott's been more so, just keeping it steady. He's the points leader, obviously. He's been doing a great job, but I think when you're talking about, a head-to-head matchup, Reddick has my money for sure this weekend. And then finally, we didn't mention either of these drivers, Ross Chastain or Chris Buescher, but Ross Chastain has not had a great season at all. He's been on a pretty rough stretch here as of late. And Chris Buescher has had a very commendable season. Like, they haven't gotten that win just yet. They've come close numerous occasions. I believe was it 2 or 3 runner-ups this season. They've been building momentum. He led laps last week at Pocono. He's favored to finish ahead of Chastain at minus 160. I like that one a lot as well. So if you were to parlay Blaney over Truex, Reddick over Elliott, and Buescher over Chastain, that comes out to plus 434 odds, and $10 would get you $53.47. So a very good payout. And again, I would even call, first of all, that 3 matchup parlay a big money bet, but the Reddick over Elliott in itself is a big money bet in my opinion as well.
Love that. It's a week where it's a fun week to bet in NASCAR because we've mentioned the fact there's such great value in race winners, prop bets, our top 5s, top 10s, head-to-head bets. Like, you could have a lot of money on this race if you're comfortable with it, and it might pay off handsomely for you. But I think it's one of those fun weeks where, again, as we talk about a DFS lineup now, there's so many different directions that you can take it. I'll rattle off the lineup I came up with real quick here, Cole, because there are a lot of ways you can go, and I want people to have options this week, especially, saying this without the qualifying positions. I think it's very important to have that in the back of your mind. You want to make sure you know where everyone's starting. But I like the idea of this week. There's so many great drivers in that $9,000 to $10,000 range, or even I guess you could say 8,800 to 10,000, to where I feel like I have several aces in my lineup. So it leads off with Ryan Blaney at 10,000. Then you've got William Byron at 9,000. I've got Tyler Reddick at 8,800, followed by Joey Logano at 8,600. Those top four I feel they're all part of either our favorites or our sleepers. In fact, that's two of our favorites and two of our sleepers in my top four drivers. And then I've got two of our value picks, and Todd Gilliland, 6,500, and Michael McDowell, 7,100. So it's actually a pretty good representation of what we've spoken about this episode, but there are a lot of different ways you could go with this. I didn't want to overpay for a William Byron or a Denny Hamlin because I feel like the drivers that are cheaper in that same tier, like Ryan Blaney, or even you can put William Byron or Tyler Reddick there, I think that they're just much better values, and you can compensate with, someone like Joey Logano that's also a great value this week. So there's a lot of different directions you could go, but that's the one that I did. I guess it's like a visual representation of what we've talked about during these 40 minutes.
I'm not even going to make another lineup because I am a massive fan of this one. I will go as far as saying I think the winner is going to come from this lineup, whether it be a Ryan Blaney, William Byron, or Joey Logano, or even Tyler Reddick, obviously. I think you got four guys right there. I guess you hone that into three with Blaney, Byron, and Reddick as legitimate contenders for the win. I think, like you said, there is a lot of value to be had in that $9,000 to $8,000 range. I think you can definitely go about sacrificing Kyle Larson or Denny Hamlin for those 3 or 4 headed monsters. And I think, you mentioned filling up the back end of the lineup. Todd Gilliland did the tire test here last month. Michael McDowell has the experience on his side. I know he has a little bit of volatility associated with him, going strictly for the win. But I think overall, this lineup is outstanding. William Byron's a winner in the Xfinity Series at this track. Ryan Blaney's last week's winner. Joey Logano's a 2-time runner-up at Indianapolis with the best average finish. So I see no flaws at all at this lineup. I am a huge fan. Load it up and lock it in.
Love this. And, obviously, again, you want to see where everyone starts before you lock this in for sure. I know I will. But, this is just such a good week. There's so many options for a lineup that it almost scares me. But this is one that we both feel pretty good about. So, Cole, before we move on to our race winner picks, I do want to mention the fact that our nickel or dime segment is on social media. We've talked about this. It's our 4th year doing the podcast. We love our paint schemes. We talk about them a lot. And this is something that in order to make room for a little bit more of the X's and O's of betting and different kinds of bets, it's a visual segment, so it's on social media. So if you want to see the paint schemes for this week or any week, follow us on social media at @_MoneyStop. I got to give a shout out to the 84. Jimmy Johnson's in this race. He's kissed the bricks several times before in the Carvana 84 that was designed by his 2 kids. I love that car, and you could see it on our social media at @_MoneyStop. And every single week we'll have, graphics. And when Cole's in person like he was at Chicago a couple weeks ago, in-person pictures of the cars and the paint schemes. So I needed to mention that before we proceed any further. But as we take it to the bank, Cole, and try to make people some money here, let's talk about race winner picks. I had Denny Hamlin last week. You had Tyler Reddick. It was both really good picks. You have the first pick this week, and I think that there's so many different directions you could take this, but let's see where your head's at right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to go with this. So I think if I were to go with a legitimate favorite, I feel best with Kyle Larson over Denny Hamlin. However, I really do believe you're going to see one of those sleepers get the win this weekend. You could tell that my head's kind of gravitating towards William Byron, Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney. I am going to go with William Byron and change it up here a bit. I know he's not on a lot of people's radars. He's not even in the top 5 shortest odds to win this race. But I like what I've seen from this team as of late. They're trending in the right direction coming off that top 5 finish at Pocono. And, he won the 500 earlier this year. He's just somebody who knows how to get it done in these big situations, these crown jewel events. And I for some reason, I woke up this morning and I just visualized that number 24 back in victory lane on the Indianapolis Oval kissing the bricks. So I'm going to go with William Byron for my favorite this weekend as the race winner.
I love that. I kind of have the same gut feeling. I was probably going to pick William Byron if you didn't. I feel strongly, too, that this is one of those weeks where you're going to see a winner come from that sleepers category, but William Byron's just a guy that has such a great feel, and you understand when he's getting hot. I think he's getting hot right now, and just love what I've seen from that team, like you said. But I am going to go with a favorite. I'm going to go with Kyle Larson. I just think that he's going to be so motivated to make this a memorable season at Indy for him, because like you thought it was going to be, Mother Nature had other plans, and I think that Kyle Larson, all signs point to him being a contender every week, but I think there's going to be a little bit extra motivation even this week to win a crown jewel race. And I think there's so many different ways you can go, but I'm going to take William Byron, or I'm going to take Kyle Larson after you took William Byron, but we've got a sweep of Hendrick Chevys there. I'm going to go first as I pick a sleeper here, though, and I will pick a Penske Ford. I like Austin Cindric this week. Outside the top 15 in odds is the criteria for our sleepers, and Austin Cindric is a guy that, again, we've seen results here and there, but it's a home race for Team Penske. I think that I could just visualize the number 2 car having a strong run at Indy this week at the Oval.
I'm a fan of that call. I think Austin Cindric is a great pick for this weekend. I know he wasn't mentioned, obviously, but I think there's something to be said about the speed they've had this year on occasion and the fact that this is a Team Penske home race. I just think, like I said, there's no way that all 3 of these cars are going to go out there and put up a dud. I fully expect him to have at least a top 15 day. And someone else who I think is going to have at least a top 15 day, and I'll go as far as saying a top 10 day, is someone else in the Ford camp in Chase Briscoe. As you can see, I'm playing heavily into that home race aspect of things. I think returning to the side of your hometown is always going to be a big deal and always inspire some confidence and whatnot, motivation. But we've seen Chase Briscoe have success here in the past, whether it be in Xfinity or in the Cup Series, albeit on a different layout. And for that, I think that, this is obviously winding down the 2024 season. There's only a few races left until Stewart-Haas Racing is no more and Chase Briscoe is with JGR. I think he is going to be motivated more than ever to put up a really good result at his home track in his final race for Stewart-Haas Racing at this track. So give me Chase Briscoe for a really, really solid top 10 day.
I like the idea, too, of, like you said, last year for Stewart-Haas Racing, I have a feeling that somebody, they're going to get one more win. They're going to get one more special win, and this would be probably the most special place to get a win for Tony Stewart and Gene Haas, and especially in the case of Chase Briscoe being his home track, too. I just think that he's also been the guy that's kind of been carrying the torch for this team over the last couple of years, besides Kevin Harvick, and I just think that I love that pick. It's just a week where the gut feelings definitely don't lie. So this is obviously the Brickyard 400, as it's supposed to be. I think we haven't really discussed the fact that NASCAR went away from the road course configuration. I think it lost its luster probably after the first race or so. I just think that, especially now, this was the perfect time to go back to the Oval. You think about the fact that, this generation, the next-gen car, with this package on the mile and a half, or the intermediates, which, the Brickyard's obviously longer than a mile and a half, it's just been such a good configuration, and I'm very, very excited to see how competitive and exciting the racing is at this Oval, where it definitely was one of the least competitive races at the time they went to the road course, so it made sense then. But as much sense as it made back then to go to the road course, it makes even more sense now to revert back to the Oval, because it's just timeless. It doesn't have the same luster, in my opinion. It doesn't feel like a crown jewel race when they do it on the road course for whatever reason, and I think it's going to feel that way this week. And I think that the racing is going to be the best we've seen at Indy in at least 5 or 10 years.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, first of all, just going back to what was a long-standing tradition is always great for the sport. But I think also on the competitive aspect of things, you've heard from so many drivers, even before the tire test this year, that they felt with this specific car that it would really, really accentuate what was so great about racing at Indianapolis back in the day, and the passing and all the crazy moves you're able to make. So I'm excited to see what these cars can do. I think there's going to be a lot of grooves to play around with. I think it's going to be a really exciting race. And I think even if it's not, just returning to this iconic Brickyard 400 format on the Oval, there's something special about it. So I know there's people that are going to have their opinions on how the racing is and always have those naysayers. But I think just returning here to what was a long-standing and great tradition, it's going to be a very welcomed, change for this new era of NASCAR.
And as we kind of close this out with some favorite memories from Indy at the Brickyard, it's a pretty easy one for me. I mean, this was a track that, growing up a big Jimmy Johnson fan, he was always so great here. And the first race I ever saw Jimmy win after becoming a Jimmy Johnson fan was the 2008 Brickyard 400 with the Cobalt car. And I always felt good about him winning here. Even the following year, one of my favorite memories, 2009, was the year that Juan Pablo Montoya kind of dominated the race and then was speeding on pit road. And Jimmy kind of stole that win. Got a really great race. Might have won it anyway. But JPM was so adamant about the fact he wasn't speeding. And those two races, the first two I ever saw at this track, stand as the two most memorable I've seen. And I also want to say, it's totally a bucket list item that I need to get out to the Brickyard. I've never been there in person, and I've heard nothing but phenomenal things, and I need to get there for both a NASCAR race and an IndyCar race, but not to get carried away. Those are two of the lasting memories at Indy for sure for me, growing up a Jimmy Johnson fan.
Yeah. I was going to say my most striking memory was definitely the '09 race where JPM was speeding on pit road on the money stop, and he swore on his wife and children that he was not speeding. That one has stuck with me since it happened. I think it's crushing, but it's still kind of funny. And yeah, that's the one for sure that sticks out to me. Also, the one in 2017 that Casey Kane won, just because I cannot miss a race. You were calling games for the Orem Owls in Utah at the time, and I was watching on my phone. I was so heavily invested in this race, and at least to my current memory, like that was the most exciting and compelling race at Indianapolis that I had watched to that point, and probably since I've been a fan of NASCAR, the most compelling race at Indianapolis on the oval that I'd watched of all time. So I really enjoyed that race. This is the second week in a row we're mentioning Casey Kane, so I don't know what that says about us. But I just remember there were a lot of really cool moments in this race. I think there was a 3-wide battle with Jimmy, Brad, and Casey for the win. So I would say those are my two memories for sure for the Indy Brickyard 400.
Yeah, that was a great one, and I cannot wait for it this week for all the reasons we mentioned. Like, there's just a renewed energy, I feel, around the Brickyard 400 this week, which is going to take place this upcoming Sunday, 2:35 Eastern Time, the Brickyard 400 on USA Network. It's going to be a really good one. I feel strongly that this is going to be the best Brickyard event we've seen in NASCAR in quite some time. So get ready for it. It's going to be a fun one, right in the heat of the summer, and it just feels like summer when we're at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So that's it. That's all we got. We're going to drop the jack on the money stop this week, your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. We'll metaphorically drop the jack here, and we will see you next week. After this race, there's only 4 more left before the playoffs, so lots to come. Exciting stuff. This is a really great week to be betting on the sport, and we hope that you bet responsibly and tail us and make some money this week. So that's all we got. For Cole, I'm Steven. Thank you all so much. Thanks for listening to The Money Stop. Feel free to continue listening, like, subscribe, all those great things on wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, you name it. And we will see you on social media as well at @_Money Stop. So we'll drop the jack, and we will see you next week.